Cameron Ellis didn't step into the Marshall County Courthouse looking for confrontation. She was just there for her nephew. Malik had been pulled over for a busted taillight, but somehow things escalated. He spent the night in county lockup, and now they were in court, trying to untangle the mess. Cameron took a personal day from her nonprofit legal job in Nashville, slipped on a charcoal blouse, dark jeans, and flats. Nothing flashy, just respectful. Around her neck, she wore a slim silver chain with a tiny cross, barely the size of a dime. The courtroom was already crowded when she arrived. A couple of lawyers shuffled papers. Deputies leaned against the back wall. A woman flipped through a manila folder on the bench behind her. Cameron slid into the third row, gave Malik a soft nod. He looked exhausted. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Then the door opened and Judge Everett Holcomb walked in. Everyone stood. He was older, tall, straight-backed, and had the kind of presence that made people sit up straighter without knowing why. A former military prosecutor turned circuit judge, Holcomb had a reputation. Stern, procedural, sharp. His courtroom was known for its silence and for how often he broke it when something rubbed him the wrong way. The bailiff called the room to order. That's when the judge scanned the seats, eyes narrowing as if something caught in his periphery. Then his gaze stopped. "You in the gray top," he said. Cameron looked around, unsure he was talking to her, but he repeated more pointedly, "Ma'am, third row." "Please rise." She stood, posture level, heart ticking a little faster. "You're wearing a religious symbol," he said. "That's not permitted in this courtroom. Neutrality is essential. You're being fined $50 for violating courtroom decorum." The room froze. No coughs, no whispering, just quiet discomfort. Cameron didn't respond right away. She'd learned the value of stillness. She'd been here before, called out, questioned, underestimated. But this moment still landed hard. A fine, for a necklace. She looked to the bailiff, then back to Holcomb. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady, "is that a published policy? I'd like to see the rule or statute that supports this penalty." The judge didn't blink. "This is my courtroom. I set the standards." Cameron nodded slightly. "I understand, sir, but are those standards written anywhere for public reference?" Now the air was really shifting. Subtle, but you could feel it. A man in the front row leaned forward. The prosecutor looked up from his folder. The bailiff's feet shuffled. "You can pay the fine at the clerk's desk or leave," the judge said. Cameron didn't move. She didn't raise her voice. She just tilted her head the slightest bit. "I'm not leaving." Someone behind her exhaled, sharp and audible. Holcomb straightened. "Then I'll hold you in contempt." "I'm here to support my nephew, Malik Gibbons," she said, calm as ever. "He asked me to be here. I'm not trying to disrupt the court, but I do believe this fine is not only unfair, it may be unlawful." The judge leaned forward. "Are you challenging my authority?" Cameron met his eyes. "I'm asking for clarification on your policy and its legal basis." There was a pause, quick, barely a breath, but it was there. He hadn't expected that. "Who are you?" he asked, voice tight. "My name is Cameron Ellis. I'm a constitutional attorney, licensed in 3 states, including Tennessee." The stillness that followed could have been bottled. A deputy near the back cleared his throat, but no sound followed. You could feel everyone drawing closer without moving at all. "I graduated from Georgetown Law in 2011, she continued. "I've worked for the Equal Justice Collective, and I currently serve as senior counsel at a civil liberties nonprofit in Nashville. I'm here today as a family member, but I know my rights, and I know the law." Holcomb blinked, adjusted a stack of papers like he suddenly needed to be busy. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. That wasn't her way. Because this wasn't new. Cameron Ellis had been underestimated most of her life. She grew up in a 1-story rental home outside Mobile, Alabama. Her mother cleaned homes. Her dad stocked shelves at a hardware store and passed away when she was 10. There were no silver spoons, no private tutors, but there were rules. Speak clearly, stand tall, don't let anyone shrink you. At 16, she'd read the Bill of Rights twice. Once for a civics class, once for herself. Not to memorize it, to understand how a country could promise so much and still delivers so little to people who look like her. People didn't expect her to know as much as she did, especially not with her hair in curls, no designer label in sight, and that quiet, unbothered tone in her voice. But she carried more than credentials. She carried fire. The necklace she wore wasn't about fashion. It had belonged to her grandmother, a midwife with no formal education but a deep well of faith. She passed it down with a note written in careful cursive. Wear this when you need to remember you're never alone. Cameron wore it every day, in meetings, in court, in waiting rooms and shelters and classrooms. Not for attention, for strength. So when Judge Holcomb tried to single her out for it, tried to make her seem small, disrespectful, out of order, he didn't rattle her. He revealed himself. And when she stood up, not loud, not angry, just steady, something in that courtroom shifted. Not because she demanded power, but because she already had it. And for the first time in that courtroom's morning rhythm, Judge Holcomb didn't quite know what to do next. Side note, likes help this reach more people, comments keep the convo going, and shares. That's how this message spreads. Cameron Ellis never wanted to be famous, never cared for titles or praise, but she had always been clear about one thing. People needed to be seen, especially when the world preferred to look past them. She was born in Mobile, Alabama, in a small brick house with a rusted mailbox and no central air. Her mom, Rochelle, worked overnight shifts at a nursing home and still came home in time to pack Cameron's lunch for school. Her dad, Anthony, held two jobs, hardware store in the mornings, warehouse at night, until a seizure on the loading dock changed everything. He didn't come home after that. Cameron was 10. After the funeral, people brought casseroles and folded money into envelopes with names scribbled in pencil. But the thing that stayed with her most wasn't the grief. It was the silence. The way people spoke in hushed tones around her. The way teachers started to lower their voices when asking if she was okay. Like loss made her fragile. Like a quiet girl couldn't be sharp. Cameron was sharp, still water, deep current. By middle school, she was finishing homework in 20 minutes and asking teachers for more. Not extra credit, just more. More context, more clarity, more answers. She had questions about everything, especially justice. Why did the police patrol her neighborhood 3 times more than the ones across the freeway? Why did landlords keep raising the rent on apartments with black mold? Why did her uncle, who served in Iraq, get denied disability 3 times before a lawyer finally helped him? She didn't ask these questions out loud, not yet, but they sat with her, they burned behind her ribs. By 16, Cameron had read the entire Constitution and most of the Federalist Papers, not for school, for herself. She wanted to understand the promises on paper versus the practice in real life. She remembered once sitting in civics class telling her teacher she wanted to be a civil rights attorney. The teacher smiled, not unkindly, but cautiously. That's a hard path, Cam. Law school is intense. Cameron just nodded, then studied harder. She graduated high school with a GPA so high it made the local paper. Her mom cried holding the newspaper, not because of the headline, but because her daughter had done it on her own terms. No shortcuts, no privilege, just grit. Cameron got into Georgetown Law on a full scholarship, and when the acceptance letter came, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just looked at the envelope, folded it in half, and slipped it into her grandmother's Bible. Because for her, it wasn't a dream come true. It was proof that her voice had weight. At Georgetown, she didn't try to be the loudest. She didn't have to be. She sat front row in constitutional law classes, asked precise questions that made tenured professors pause, and kept a legal pad filled with case summaries and dissenting opinions. Her classmates respected her. Some admired her. A few, honestly, feared her. But most didn't see her fully. They saw the box she checked, the soft-spoken black girl who stood out. An exception. That word stuck like a splinter. Even after graduation, even with job offers from 2 top firms in D.C., Cameron chose a different path. She turned them down, politely, respectfully, and joined a nonprofit in Alabama working on wrongful eviction cases and expungements. Her salary was low, her office had no window, but the impact was real. She once helped a mother of three avoid eviction after the landlord tried to raise rent illegally. Another time, she got a teenager's misdemeanor cleared so he could qualify for a job training program. She didn't win every case, but she showed up day after day, not for prestige, for people. When she moved to Nashville, she joined a civil liberties organization focused on due process and housing discrimination. That was the job she took a day off from to drive 2 hours south and sit in the back of a courtroom for Malik. She didn't come to make a statement. She came to be present, but that cross necklace, that quiet symbol, became the spark. And when the judge tried to turn it into something loud, something rebellious or inappropriate, Cameron didn't react. She responded. Because this wasn't the first time someone had mistaken her calm for weakness. There was the time a senior partner called her sweetheart during a deposition. The time an officer asked her if she was the client instead of the attorney. The time she was asked to smile more during closing arguments because it would make her less intimidating. She never shouted, never snapped. She just let the silence do the work. Her grandma always said the loudest thing you can do is stand. And Cameron stood. That day in court, she wasn't fueled by outrage. She was fueled by memory, by the image of her mom counting tips in a brown paper bag, by the photo of her dad in his work boots framed above the kitchen sink, by the teenage version of herself who stayed up reading landmark Supreme Court cases while the rest of her class scrolled social feeds. She carried all of them with her. That's why the fine didn't shake her. She knew the law, she knew her rights. But more than that, she knew what it meant to walk into a space where no one expects you to speak, and then change the whole atmosphere by saying just enough. Power, she believed, didn't need to announce itself. It just needed to stand firm. So when the judge asked her who she was, and she told him, that wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a moment of truth. Not for her, for everyone watching. The bailiff, the public defender, the woman in the back row who clutched her purse a little tighter when she saw Cameron walk in, and then loosened her grip when she heard her speak. It wasn't about being right. It was about being ready. She'd trained her whole life for moments like that. Not knowing when they'd come, just knowing they would. And when they did, she'd be wearing that cross, not for attention, but because it reminded her that she didn't walk alone. Malik's name was finally called. He stood up slowly, dressed in a wrinkled county-issued button-down shirt, the collar slightly frayed. His wrists were free, but his shoulders still carried the weight of a night in lockup. He looked toward Cameron, not with panic, but with something quieter, a silent question. Do I stand alone in this? She gave him the smallest nod. No words, just presence. The public defender shuffled forward, clutching a half-open folder and clearing his throat. He didn't look prepared. Cameron could already see it, the way his eyes moved too fast across the pages, the way he positioned himself halfway between the bench and the defense table, like he wasn't fully committed to either. Before he could say a word, Cameron stepped forward. Your Honor, she said, voice clear and even, with the court's permission, I'd like to represent Mr. Malik Gibbons today. Judge Holcomb blinked, a slight delay, like his internal script had just been interrupted. You're not on record as counsel, he said. I have my bar card with me, she replied. Tennessee license is active and current. If you need confirmation, I'm listed under Cameron Elaine Ellis with the State Bar. I've reviewed the charges and discussed the incident with Mr. Gibbons. He'd like me to stand in his defense. Another pause, this one heavier. The judge looked to the bailiff, then to the prosecutor, then back to Cameron. He gave one nod. Proceed. She walked over to the defense table, placed one hand gently on Malik's shoulder. His posture shifted, not dramatically, but enough, like someone exhaling after holding their breath too long. Cameron faced the court, composed. Your Honor, she began, according to the police report, Mr. Gibbons was stopped for a non-functioning taillight. During the stop, he was asked to exit the vehicle and was subjected to a search. There was no warrant, no stated probable cause in the officer's written report. No indication of danger or illegal behavior that would justify a search. She pulled a folded document from her purse and handed it to the clerk. I've submitted a motion to dismiss. It references 3 Tennessee Supreme Court rulings affirming that a warrantless search in this context constitutes a Fourth Amendment violation. Additionally, the charge of resisting arrest appears to stem from Mr. Gibbons verbally questioning the reason for his handcuffing. There is no audio or video evidence provided to support the charge, despite the officers being equipped with department-issued body cams. Silence. No interruptions. No objections. Just a quiet recalibration of the room's energy. The judge took the motion, adjusted his glasses, and began reading. You could see his jaw tense as his eyes scanned the text, his left thumb tapping slowly against the edge of the folder. Cameron didn't speak again. She knew better than to overfill a moment. She'd already said enough. Behind her, the room shifted again, not with movement, but with awareness. The woman next to the wall stopped scrolling through her phone. One of the deputies narrowed his eyes, not in suspicion, but curiosity. The prosecutor stopped flipping through his case notes. This wasn't the same woman they thought had caused a scene earlier. This was someone else entirely. Holcomb looked up. You wrote this yourself? I did. Last night, after reviewing the available materials and speaking with Mr. Gibbons. You're not with a firm? No, sir. I'm senior counsel at a civil liberties nonprofit. We specialize in due process violations, wrongful convictions, and housing discrimination. He set the motion on the bench and steepled his fingers. Does your client have any prior arrests? Number no record of violent offenses. He's an apprentice with a local electricians union. He was on his way to a job site when the stop occurred. The judge looked toward the prosecutor. State's position? A beat. Then the prosecutor stood, but not with his usual confidence. We'd be willing to drop the resisting arrest charge. Keep the traffic infraction. Cameron didn't hesitate. We'd accept that, provided the court acknowledges that the search lacked legal foundation and should not be cited as precedent. Mr. Gibbons deserves that recognition on the record. It was bold, not confrontational, just direct, clear. The judge didn't answer right away. He looked at Cameron, not as a nuisance, not even as an opponent, but as a peer. Then he adjusted his glasses and tapped the motion once. Motion granted, resisting arrest is dismissed. Traffic citation will remain, reduced to a warning. No fines, no additional penalties. Malik didn't move at first, like his mind hadn't caught up with his body. Then he stood, turned to Cameron, hugged her tight. It wasn't rehearsed. It was relief, raw and real. People in the courtroom began whispering again, but not about Malik, about her, Cameron Ellis, the woman who calmly dismantled protocol and shifted the balance of the room. But she wasn't done. As Malik returned to his seat, Cameron turned back to the bench. Before I sit down, Your Honor, she said, voice steady as before, I'd like to formally challenge the fine issued earlier. Judge Holcomb looked like someone had tapped him awake. You want to reopen that matter? Yes, sir. You stated that religious symbols were not permitted in your courtroom, but unless this courtroom is operating under martial law, the First Amendment is still in effect. In County of Allegheny versus ACLU, the Supreme Court made clear that institutions must remain neutral, not hostile, toward religion. Banning a cross pendant from someone who isn't addressing the court isn't neutrality, it's suppression. Now the air went completely still. She took a single step forward. Furthermore, no written policy has been provided. No signage exists in this courtroom indicating that religious symbols are banned. No prior warning was issued. I was fined without citation, without precedent, and without an attempt to verify my role or intention. Holcomb's face twitched, barely, but enough to reveal something cracking beneath the surface. Not anger, not defensiveness, just awareness. You're accusing the court of violating your rights? I'm stating facts, Cameron said, and requesting that the fine be withdrawn and the record reflect that the incident occurred outside of proper legal procedure. Another long pause. Then the judge nodded once. The fine is withdrawn. It will not appear on record. Cameron gave a single nod. No smile, no performance, just acknowledgement. Thank you, Your Honor. She returned to her seat, pulled a notebook from her bag, and opened to a clean page. She didn't look around to see who was staring. She already knew they were. Some stories explode, others unfold. This one did both. But Cameron didn't need attention. She needed the system to feel her presence. And in that courtroom, on that day, the center of power had shifted, quietly, permanently. The moment the gavel dropped and the next case was called, Cameron Ellis faded into the background, at least on the surface. But the atmosphere in that courtroom didn't snap back into place. The rhythm was off now. The spell of unquestioned routine had been cracked, and people felt it. The judge read the next defendant's name with less edge. He shuffled papers more carefully. He paused before issuing his standard bail instructions. Even his voice had changed, subtly softer, slightly slower. Cameron noticed. So did the bailiff, who no longer stood with that same rigid readiness. He looked more alert now, but in a different way. Not like he was bracing for disruption, like he was listening. Cameron didn't speak again. She just sat still, scribbling a few quiet notes in the back of her legal pad while the rest of the docket dragged on. But her stillness wasn't absence. It was presence, the kind that lingered even after the words had stopped. About 30 minutes passed. Then Judge Holcomb called a recess. No explanation. Just a quiet, "We'll resume at 10:15, and he disappeared through the side door. Cameron stayed seated. The bailiff walked toward her, not with suspicion, but curiosity. "Ma'am?" he asked quietly, not quite sure if this was official business or something more personal. "Can I ask you something?" She glanced up from her notes and gave him a small nod. "Did you know that was going to happen?" he asked, voice hushed. With all of this?" Cameron let out the faintest laugh through her nose. "No," she said, "but I wasn't going to let it slide." The bailiff scratched the back of his neck, looked toward the empty bench. "I've been here 8 years. I've never seen him back down like that." "He's not a bad man," Cameron said gently. "But power without accountability, that's dangerous." He nodded, not out of duty, but out of understanding. Outside the courtroom, the whispers turned into full conversations. In the hallway, two court clerks leaned against the wall, talking in low voices. One of them pulled up a blog on her phone. The headline was already live. "Attorney challenges judge's authority, wins dismissal and retraction," without ever raising her voice. Someone had recorded part of the hearing from the gallery. A 15-second clip was already floating around on Twitter. Cameron didn't know that yet. She wouldn't learn until later how fast it all spread. Inside the courtroom, she sat still, grounded, quiet, present. When court resumed, things weren't the same. The judge was careful now. The prosecutor was less dismissive. Defendants who came up after Malik stood a little taller. The gallery stopped seeing themselves as just background noise, because something had shifted. It wasn't about headlines. It was about permission. Permission to speak. Permission to push back. Permission to be more than just another body in the pews. After court adjourned, Cameron rose slowly, gathered her bag. She was halfway to the door when she heard her name again. "Miss Ellis." She turned. Judge Holcomb had stepped down from the bench. He wasn't rushing. He moved slowly, deliberately, like each step carried weight. "I'd like a word," he said. She paused, then nodded. She looked to Malik, who was leaning against the back wall scrolling through his phone. "Give me 5, she said under her breath. The judge didn't lead her to chambers. He stopped near the side of the courtroom, far enough for privacy but still within sight of the gallery. He cleared his throat. His tone was softer now. "I owe you an apology." Cameron didn't speak. Not yet. "I made an assumption," he continued, "about your role, your intentions. I was wrong." She let that sit for a moment, then said quietly, "I'm used to it." "But that's the problem, isn't it?" He looked down, hands clasped. "I've been behind that bench for 32 years. I tell myself I'm fair, that I'm neutral. But today you made me realize sometimes what we call neutral is just what's comfortable for the person already holding the gavel." That hit harder than he expected. Cameron didn't smile, didn't soften it. She just looked at him with that same quiet clarity she carried into every room. "I don't expect forgiveness," Holcomb said, "but I won't forget today." She gave a small nod. "That's all I hope for." She turned to go. But before she could take a step, he called after her. "If you're ever back in Marshall County, I'd be honored to hear you argue again." Officially, that part surprised her. "I hope I won't need to," she said with a small grin. They both understood what that meant. Outside, the sun had risen higher. The parking lot shimmered with heat, and the breeze had disappeared. Malik was already by the car, watching her approach. "What the hell was that?" he asked, eyes wide. Cameron shrugged, unlocking the driver's side. "Just a little civics lesson." "No, seriously, you shut a judge down, in his own courtroom. You didn't even raise your voice." She looked at him sideways. "Don't romanticize it. I didn't come there to fight. I came to listen. But when someone tries to shrink you for something that makes you who you are, you've got two choices. Sit still or speak up." He leaned against the car, head tilted. "I swear, if I didn't know better, I'd think you rehearsed that." She laughed. "Maybe I should start writing it down." As she opened the car door, a voice called from behind. "Miss Ellis?" A young reporter jogged up the sidewalk, recorder in one hand, notepad in the other. "I was in the courtroom," she said. "I think people would want to hear your side of what happened. Would you be open to an interview?" Cameron looked at Malik, then at the reporter. "Let me think about it." The reporter handed her a business card and backed off. "You made a lot of people think today. That doesn't happen often in court." They drove off in silence at first. Malik's phone buzzed every few seconds. Text messages, DMS missed calls. His cousin in Memphis had already heard. A screenshot of a local legal blog had made its way into a group chat. The title read, "She walked in to support her nephew. She walked out, changing the room." He turned the screen toward her. "It's already online." Cameron shook her head and smiled. "I told you. People talk, especially when you don't give them the performance they expect." But to her, what happened outside the courtroom mattered just as much as what happened inside. The ripples were real, not because they were loud, but because they were honest. Cameron Ellis didn't celebrate that night. There was no dinner out, no raised glasses, no social media post. She drove home in silence, windows halfway down, the hum of the tires and the soft tap of her cross necklace against her collarbone, the only sounds. Her apartment smelled faintly of sage and printer ink. She changed into a hoodie, made a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table with the lights dimmed low. Her inbox had filled up fast. Emails from law school classmates, fellow attorneys, strangers. A few civil rights blogs had already posted breakdowns of the courtroom exchange. Someone had clipped part of the footage from the court's live stream and posted it online with the caption, "This is how you dismantle injustice without ever raising your voice." But Cameron wasn't watching any of it. She was thinking about something Judge Holcomb said, something that wouldn't leave her alone. Sometimes what we call neutral is just what's comfortable for the people already holding the gavel. That had stuck, because it wasn't just true in courtrooms, it was true in hiring committees, school boards, police reports, newsrooms, politics. Everywhere decisions were made by people convinced they weren't biased, because they were comfortable. She remembered being 12, sitting next to her grandmother during evening service. The pastor had said, "Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is stand." Back then it sounded poetic. Now it felt like a roadmap. The next day she returned to her office at the nonprofit. No applause, no welcome back banner, just a case file slid across her desk and a post-it from an intern. "Can you look at this before noon?" She liked it that way, but word travels, especially when you don't spread it yourself. A week later, someone from the law department at Middle Tennessee State reached out. They were organizing a panel on courtroom bias and wanted her to speak. She almost said no. Almost. But then she remembered that courtroom. The way people's expressions changed as they saw her, not as someone's cousin, but as someone who carried authority, even when she didn't announce it. And she remembered the woman in the back row who looked confused when Cameron stood up, but curious when she didn't sit back down. So she said yes. 2 weeks after that, a pastor from a church in nearby Smyrna asked if she'd speak to their youth group. He wanted someone who could explain what the law really meant, how it could protect, and how to hold it accountable. She agreed. Not because she craved attention, but because the story no longer belonged to her. It belonged to every person who'd ever sat in the back of a courtroom and thought, "They won't listen to me," and maybe now someone would. She never told Judge Holcomb this, but that day changed her too. She thought about him often, wondered if he still played that moment in his mind, wondered if he'd ever looked at someone differently because of it. Maybe with more care, maybe with more humility. She hoped so. Then one Friday afternoon, as she left her office late, she found a white envelope taped to her apartment door. No name, no return address, just her name typed neatly across the front. Inside was a single typed note. Miss Ellis, I've revised the courtroom conduct guidelines. Religious attire or symbols, unless disruptive, will no longer be penalized. E.H. No signature, just initials. But it was enough. She folded the note and tucked it into her grandmother's Bible, right next to her law school acceptance letter. Because change doesn't always come with cameras flashing or crowds cheering. Sometimes it arrives quietly. She didn't frame the letter, didn't post it. She just kept doing the work, helping a tenant fight an illegal eviction, taking midnight calls from mothers whose sons had been detained without charge, driving across counties to observe judges rumored to mistreat low-income defendants, never announcing herself, just watching, taking notes, waiting for patterns to form. People would ask how she stayed calm, how she didn't snap when someone disrespected her. She always gave the same answer. I know what I carry. I don't have to throw it around to prove it's heavy. That courtroom didn't change her. It reminded her why she chose this work in the first place. Not for revenge, not for glory, for dignity. She didn't want to humiliate Judge Holcomb. She wanted him to think, and in that, she succeeded. Months later, she spoke at a public charter school in Memphis. A group of teenage girls had gathered in the library. One of them raised her hand and asked, "Weren't you that lady who talked back to the judge and made him look stupid?" Cameron smiled. "I didn't talk back," she said. "I talked forward." The girl frowned. "Isn't that the same thing?" "Not even close," she replied. A few girls laughed, but a couple didn't. A couple really listened. Those were the ones she was speaking to. She went on. "The goal isn't to win arguments, it's to win ground. So the next person doesn't have to fight the same fight." That line stuck with them, just like it stuck with her. She knew the tweets would fade, the blog posts would be buried, but someone would remember. Someone who had been in that courtroom that day, watching quietly from the benches. Someone who had felt invisible and walked out a little taller. That was enough. There are people who walk into rooms and demand to be seen, and then there are people like Cameron, who walk in, speak with clarity, and leave the room changed behind them. As for the cross, she still wore it, every day, and if another courtroom tried to make it a problem, she'd be ready again, because there will always be someone who wants to shrink you down to fit their comfort, and there will always be a choice: shrink or stand, speak or let the silence speak for you. Cameron chose to stand, not with volume, but with truth, not for recognition, but for impact. And that's why people remembered her, not just because she won, but because of how she did it.